looking for escapism, I just want to escape.
Welcome back to my disembodied voice. In today's video, we're going to look at something called opponent process theory and discuss what that means and, when it comes to some classic movie characters, how it impacts their journey and characteristics, motivations in the story and outcomes in the film. Now, there is a lot to get through today, so let's crack on and get right to the crux of what opponent process theory really is. Opponent process theory is a term coined in the field of psychology that explains how the primary or initial reaction to an emotional event will subsequently be followed by an opposite secondary emotional state. The theory was notoriously coined by Richard L. Solomon. However, it was first proposed in 1878 by a man called Ewald Hering, a German physiologist, and later expanded on by Solomon, who was a 20th century psychologist. Now, opponent process theory is a process that sees a stimulus that initially inspires displeasure, but will eventually, with the passage of time, become a pleasurable emotional response. However, this can work vice versa, and a pleasurable response can soon become displeasurable. So, in layman's terms, high anxiety, which the sufferer gets scant relief when they complete a task, will eventually end up with the relief overtaking the anxiety, or, on the flip side, a massive drug-induced high and then a minor come down will eventually become such an ineffective fix that the come down is all the user will really feel, despite using more and more of the drug to activate the weakening high state. In other words, the opponent process wins. The drug gives you a high, but the more you use it, the more the high becomes ineffectual, and the opponent process, the come down, the withdrawal, the despair, that rises and takes over. Solomon stated that the very process has an affective balance. That is to say, the process is either negative or positive, and is subsequently followed by an immediate secondary opponent process. This opponent B process sets in only after the initial primary A process has stopped eliciting the original emotional experience and the feelings that come with it. The most important thing here to note is that with repeated exposure, the opponent process is strengthened while the initial primary process becomes weaker with the passage of time. But we'll cover more on that later. So the emotional value that is provided by the initial primary A process will always be in direct contrast to the opponent B process. Like I said before, a drug high A process becomes a come down B process, but eventually the A process is diminished and all you really get is the B process. Or say you started a new job, for example. Initially, the A process is nerves, anxiety and worry as you settle in and at times get things wrong. However, that's followed by a B process of feeling good about yourself as you get things right and develop in the role. Eventually, the A process disappears or becomes very minor, and the B process takes over. So for a new job, no more nerves of A process, lots of relief and lots of satisfaction in B process. So all in all, the A process, which can either be positive or negative, is eventually squashed completely and overtaken by the prevailing B process, which is the emotional experience associated with the particular stimulus event. And this is because all emotional states change as time goes on, and so do the impacts of their lasting effects. For example, an initially pleasurable experience, such as falling in love, can eventually give rise to negative responses and feelings, such as jealousy, withdrawal, loneliness, feeling trapped, or feeling resentful. And this happens because, as time goes on, the stimulus that originally triggered those feelings associated with that experience can not only change, but the circumstances that surround them can also change as well. Basically, the more we repeat something, the more habitual it becomes, or the more that we do something that makes us happy, then the more mundane it becomes, and thus the opponent process wins through in the end. Take lockdown during the COVID pandemic, where many kids and adults felt quite relieved at not having to go to school or work, and for some, this felt liberating because they got more time at home, and be it the fact they could do more gaming, or reading, or watching TV, or hanging around with the family. Eventually, as time went on, we got a huge minus because we felt isolated, unproductive, and as time really progressed, we got more frustrated with being stuck at home and not seeing people. The positive valence of being free from commuting or going to school or work eventually weakened, and the cabin fever set in as we couldn't live our lives with independence. Basically, what we thought was a positive emotion, more freedom, more time at home, more relaxation time, gave way to a strong negative feeling of isolation, boredom, and loneliness. All in all, our sanctuaries of home and pleasure and free time became prisons of boredom, hostility, and frustration. Okay, but what about our movie characters, and how have they been impacted by opponent process theory? Well, opponent process theory is very prevalent in the superhero genre, as once our protagonist gets new powers, they are confronted with strong emotions and consequences. And there's no better exemplifier for this than in Sam Raimi's first two Spider-Man movies. Let's start at the beginning in Spider-Man 1. Peter Parker is a bullied teen who has no real popularity, is lonely but still upbeat, gets picked on, and cannot have the girl of his dreams, which is MJ. Then he gets bitten by a spider and becomes Spider-Man, and we see him learning his new powers with great glee and excitement. So, his primary emotions, the positive ones, are of feeling good and getting excited. The secondary emotions are negative and about guilt and feeling isolated, and this progresses more and more as the film progresses. Take, for example, when he's learning his powers, but he misses some decorating time with Uncle Ben and comes home to some very disappointed looks. That initial joy and excitement has a slight negative impact, and he now feels guilty. Peter then decides his new powers can get him some cash to get a car, so he goes and fights and then beats the Bonesaw wrestler. However, his primary emotion of joy becomes less as he first gets swindled of his money and then lets the robber go who kills Uncle Ben. Now his joy of being a powerful superhero is being overrun by guilt. After Uncle Ben dies, Peter becomes Spider-Man pretty much full-time because of this guilt and decides to stop being so selfish and thus restore the primary emotion of feeling good and excited, and also taking great power and great responsibility, but his very power incites great challenge. And the more he saves people, the more he misses out on his friends, has to withdraw from a potential relationship, and gets involved with Norman Osborn's death on a poorly lit soundstage. This then eventually will lead to Harry Osborn falling out with him in later films. By the time we get to Spider-Man 2, Peter's joy and excitement, the A process, are completely gone, and being a superhero is a chore. He's broke, feeling low, falling behind in his study, missing out on happiness, and so desperate to be with MJ, who's now moved on with a bit of an astronaut hunk. By the time his webs stop firing and he has a crisis of faith, his negative emotions of being lonely, isolated, guilty, and wanting his life back have overridden the joy of his powers and his sense of responsibility. So, with the primary A emotion of joy and happiness now completely gone, Peter is left with the negative B process emotion, which is isolation, guilt, and feeling low, and the negativity completely overwhelms him. In other words, his happiness and joy has been beaten by the negative opponent process. However, MJ gets captured, and as Peter loves MJ, he fights with Dr. Octopus and ends up accepting his destiny and getting the girl. Basically, every time Peter Parker has a primary emotion, much like his alter ego, we're caught in a dyad where an opposing emotion rises and overtakes the primary emotion, And where he was once thrilled by being Spider-Man with very little negativity, the negativity soon overwhelms him and he has to quit being Spider-Man until duty forces him back and he accepts his role. And the conflict between opponent process theory and superhero slash alter ego is perfectly balanced in the superhero genre and seen even more perfectly in Christopher Nolan's Dark Knight trilogy. Now, without going over Batman's entire origin history, when we meet Bruce Wayne, he's at rock bottom because his parents have been killed and he didn't do anything about it and he was scared. So he becomes Batman. However, the primary emotion of power, control, and the joy at mashing the mob soon changes as they rise to his challenge. His love interest Rachel even wonders who is the dominant personality in the movies, as she knows that Bruce needs Batman and, much like opponent process, the dark Batman is slowly overtaking the Bruce persona. In other words, the balance will never exist and the normal or positive image slash persona of billionaire Bruce Wayne will eventually be squashed and overtaken by the darker and risk-taking Batman. Now, by the time the Joker arrives in Gotham in The Dark Knight, any joy in being Batman is gone, as the Joker doesn't follow Batman's rules and injures Harvey Dent and kills Rachel and turns the city upside down. And from charging around in his Batcar and smiling with Lucius Fox over the wonderful toys he has, we now see him broken in his Batsuit and mourning Rachel's death. Like Bruce and the Bat, who are engaged in a constant war where the darker side could win, the more he does the Batman persona, the more the negative consequences and emotions suppress the positive ones. And to feel positive and make a difference, Bruce Wayne has to Batman even harder and take even more risks, which in the end doesn't bring back the primary emotion, it only strengthens the negative emotion, the opponent process. Now let's come to Blade, the original one with Wesley Snipes, and use the metaphor of drug addiction and his serum to go through opponent process theory. After all, the initial buzz that comes from the first use of any drug that we use, be it opiate, meth, cannabis, you name it, basically gives us a huge buzz and we want more of that buzz. However, the more we use the drug, the more our bodies get used to it, the more the come downs happen, and the more the negative withdrawal, craving, physical health effects, and all the other things combine. Basically, the primary buzz gets replaced by very strong negative emotions. To put it in even more simpler terms, the first time you shoot up a dose of heroin, it's amazing. It offers a massive high, but only a short, sharp come down. However, over time, more heroin is needed, and this creates physical illness, severe come downs, and the positive highs are minimal and the negative lows and sickness have taken over. Not only that, but the negative effects of withdrawal grow along with the dependency of drug use, which lead to the issue of the drug becoming a necessity for the well-being or function of the person, regardless of how little it works. But how does this relate to Blade? Well, in Blade, our hero needs a serum to suppress his craving for human blood, as he hates who he is and doesn't want to be a vampire. But as Whistler starts injecting him early on in life, he's become tolerant to the serum, and the dose is now getting dangerous because of this tolerance. So Blade is left fighting the effects of each serum injection to the point where it's now causing convulsions, shaking, and immense pain. In other words, the positive side of suppressing the hunger, where a small amount of serum and no side effects suppressed the hunger and gave him great relief, has been replaced by the negative process, lots of pain, a tolerance to the serum, and he has to use more and more often because it's not working. In other words, the negative side of the drug has taken over. When it comes to opponent process theory, it can be applied for many characters across many genres, and actually, one genre it's really useful in is the buddy cop formula. Now, if I was to list every single film in the buddy cop genre, we'd be here for days. So let's condense it down and take a simple buddy cop comedy movie where two opposing characters have to work together. Now, The buddy cops often start off as opposites and vastly different ends of the spectrum, and everything they do is at odds with each other, but every time they ease a small amount of tension, a little bit of respect is gained and they grow a little bit together. So, be it an action movie like 48 Hours or Hobbs and Shaw, or even a comedy like Dan Aykroyd's movie Dragnet or the gritty serial killer Seven, the cops dislike each other initially, but like opponent process theory, each action and plot turn reduces one strong emotion, in this case the hostility, and engenders respect. And this respect can come from many angles. It can come from breakthroughs in a case, watching them beat up a bad guy, one of them helping each other out. It doesn't really matter how it happens. The point is, where they start as two completely different people on different dichotomies of the scale, they will eventually end merged into one. However, if that film was to continue and you were to just keep watching these two, they'd eventually grow apart a little bit, because that initial bonding is only going to go one way. Yes, they may still stay friends, but that initial success and yes, we're a team will eventually be met by new processes, because as they grow, they will inevitably start growing apart. It's perhaps best exemplified in the movie Seven, as Mills and Somerset start, the hotshot kid, the old detective, and they grow together as the film goes on. However, just as they're at the point where they really are together, a spanner's thrown in the works, and the hotshot kid finds out that the killer has decapitated his wife. Then everything goes out the window, and there is no reasoning with him, and this time the togetherness and the partnership that got them to this level of success immediately starts to change, and a new process comes in. Even Anakin Skywalker goes through opponent process theory in the Star Wars prequels, as he leaves his home to be a Jedi and is initially excited and thrilled, but be it the initial findings of space being cold, or upon joining the monastic Jedi cult, the sexual frustration because he wants to be in bed with Padme, the initial discipline, peace and joy of being around Obi-Wan is eroded by fear, anger and eventually hate. Being a Jedi is cool, and using the Force is fun, and having respect and developing a skill is a positive side for Anakin. But as the movies progress and the Jedi religion forbids sex, the guilt over leaving his mother grows, and his anger at being held back and controlled builds. His initial dark side tinglings of doubt and momentary lapses into anger get more frequent, and as he slips further towards the negative emotions, they overtake the positive ones, and he ends up losing everything as the dark side envelops him. Again, from being the little boy, through to the teenager, through to Darth Vader, you can see how Anakin goes through a journey and the process of the primary emotions of excitement and joy eroding as the negative sides take over. Be it the final girl, the scared protagonist, or the brave superhero, opponent process theory plays a part in character journeys, because you don't change and evolve without good going sour, dark turning to light, or any opponent process slowly eliminating the other. It creates conflict, resolution, catharsis, and on a personal level, sends our heroes or protagonists or antagonists at times to the edge of sanity and puts them through hell. An opponent process theory affects us all, but it doesn't mean we're all doomed to negativity. It actually can be a positive, like the job you once used to like, but over time has ground you down and now annoys you. Well, now the love is gone for that job and you hate it, so you get off your butt and you find a new job. And many people talk about hitting rock bottom from addiction, and then the negative side, which has replaced the positive side, has to be replaced with a positive one again. Basically, the yin and yang struggle to succeed and get clean, defines someone, and creates an ongoing battle of triumph, conflict, danger, fighting, triumph, conflict, danger, winning. And that's what makes us human, and that's what makes us people. Everything has a darker opposite, and opponent process theory is a great way of exploring it. It's also a great way of developing as a person, and when it comes to movies, it's important that our characters do develop. Nobody should end the movie where they started it. That's the whole point of telling stories. We go through journeys, we learn, we develop, we have wants, needs, things define us. More importantly though, what we feel changes, And as the old is extinguished by the new, the light by the dark, and so forth, it creates some fascinating character journeys. Anyway, that's it for this week's video. So remember that psychology is cool. Please like, share and subscribe, and I emphasize the subscribe because the more I grow on this channel, the more videos I can make. And also feel free to leave a comment, as healthy debate is always good on here. And as ever, you know the drill. Until next time, I'll catch you later.
What do you